Hello. Welcome to Season 10 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, our theme is Because We Have the Microphone. And because we have the microphone, you will listen as we discuss a bunch of movies that we just kind of feel like watching with no rhyme or reason. Think of it as a collection of movies that we've referenced a lot in previous seasons or been curious about for a long time. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. I got real, nostalgic in a good way as soon as this one started.
Really?
Yeah, because it reminded me of watching it with you at my house when I still lived in Oklahoma.
So, are we sure it was with me? Because I don't think I've ever seen it before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
if you mistook me for Russell, I'm going to lose it.
No, I must have just been by myself. But it was in the house where we would hang out and watch movies, so I just assumed this had been one of the ones that we saw. Which I kind of thought was weird, because normally we would watch more horror movies. Yeah. But yeah, I must have just been by myself then. But I updated my memory to be less lonely.
That's true. That's all right.
So you hadn't seen this one before?
No.
Oh, that's awesome.
No, I've never seen it.
Because I will be interested to hear your take on a few parts, especially towards the end. Because, obviously there are some pretty big twists in the story. Mm-hmm. And having seen it before, more than once, rewatching it it's less shocking, because you kind of know what's coming.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to have the perspective on this episode of someone who hadn't seen it before. So, yeah.
Yeah, man. I was really excited when it was on the list just because I hadn't seen it. It was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, this is another one that I feel like, we were talking about Prisoners did really well at the box office, but we never hear anyone talk about it. This one, I feel like a few people will mention, if you bring it up, they'll say oh yeah, that was a good movie. But I feel like it doesn't have quite as much of a following around it as a movie like Inception, where people are oh yeah, that was mind-bending, it's so crazy, and everybody saw it. But I feel like this one, for me at least, was kind of on par. And I thought both from a movie-making perspective, from the plot, and just general, the way that it was all put together and the way it made you feel, I just thought it was top tier. Yeah,
it was definitely. I mean, the thing also is it's a Martin Scorsese film, so it's going to be put together really well. Mm-hmm. The guy's proven himself over and over.
Yeah.
So just seeing that alone, well, I mean, I knew going into it, but I was like, okay, we're not in for one of the bad. This isn't a bad week.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Cool. Well, I will introduce it, and then you can do your fun facts, and then we will get into the remembering things in a way that is less disturbing to your own psyche details.
I give it an 8.
See what I did there with the way I brought up
I did.
The beginning.
That's why I gave it an 8.
Appreciate you.
Out of 5.
In 2010, Paramount Pictures brought us Shutter Island, a Martin Scorsese-directed psychological thriller starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Mark Ruffalo, Ben Kingsley, Michelle Williams, and a bunch of other actors that have been in a ton of different things in the early to mid-2000s. Shutter Island tells the story of two detectives who arrive at a mysterious island facility for the treatment of the criminally insane. As the detectives begin to investigate the disappearance of a patient, they only uncover more questions about the patients, the island, and themselves. Shutter Island was made on a budget of $80 million and brought in almost $295 million at the box office. It can currently be streamed on Netflix.
That was the other awesome thing about this.
Yeah. It was easy just to not have to go through the whole have to try and find the place to watch it. Have to go through it. Yeah. No, just it's on Netflix. I'm already on Netflix. Play it. No extra cost.
Right.
Easy.
Yeah, because I feel like every week it's almost like a game for us of okay, how do I get a free trial to Stars again or something?
Yeah, exactly. So,
okay, I'll rent it.
Yeah. But yeah, what did you learn about this one?
So this was one of the so it was received positively by critics, and it's one of the top 10 films of the 2010s, but it didn't receive an Oscar nomination, which is relatively weird for a Martin Scorsese film, and I think it might be the only one that hasn't, especially one with him and Leonardo DiCaprio, that hasn't been nominated, at least. Which is strange. Did you know it's also based on a novel?
No.
Published in 2003. It was written by Dennis Lehane. He wrote the book in an attempt to bring homage to gothic setting B-movie and pulp. The movie itself is supposed to be an updated film noir from like the 40s, you know, real big back then. But it's supposed to be like an updated version of that. However, just so you know, Dennis Lehane, he also wrote Mystic River, which I've seen it. It was directed by Clint Eastwood. Pretty good film. I highly recommend you watch it if you hadn't seen it. And I have another fact, but it's actually like pertains to the story, so I'll just bring it up later on when we're talking, because I don't want to get too in depth, and also I like to leave people wanting more. So those are the facts I have.
Bold strategy. I like it.
Yeah.
So one thing that we talked about with season 10 is that we wanted to go back and watch a bunch of movies that we've referenced or that we feel like do things that we complain about in a lot of the horror movies that we watch, like, well. Mm-hmm. And so some of the deciding factors for this one, for me, were the mood, tone, and pace. And I feel like a thing we constantly complain about with some of the horror movies that we watch is that they don't manage those things well. And so, like, you have a movie where the, let's say, sound and color don't match the feel that it's going for in a scene, or where the movie does a really good job like building up to something scary happening, and then something scary happens and then it just kind of falls flat until the end, or the whole movie is meant to be build up but nothing pays off, so you have nothing to keep you going till the end and you just get bored before like the payoff happens. This movie is like 2.5 hours with a ton of story, a bunch of characters, flashbacks, twists and turns, but I feel like it does an exemplary job of pacing and keeping it engaging. And like a lot of the times, and doing that with the movie making, because a lot of the times, even if it was just dialogue, the music would be like slowly escalating in the background, and then something would happen and it would grab your attention just because you already had like that tension sort of in the back of your mind, because they were using the elements of making the movie to make you uncomfortable so that the thing was more impactful. And so, like, one good example I have of that is when Leo and Mark were standing in the crypt in the cemetery and talking about like the government conspiracy and all of that. And as they're doing that, there's like this sort of building kind of moody swelling music behind them. And it's just two guys standing there talking, but you're getting like on edge, and the acting, you know, Leo's seeming like more and more, you know, or maybe less put together than he did at first. And then all of a sudden when the wind blows those doors open, mm-hmm. It's just like this super intense and like attention grabbing, edge of your seat type moment, when really all that happened was that two guys talked for a minute and then the wind blew a door open. Yeah. But just like the way that you experienced that in the movie, even though it wasn't some like huge plot point, it wasn't some like hugely violent scene, it was still very engaging and still like did that build up and then that like crash. And then you could kind of take a breath for a minute and you were ready to pay attention again to like the next part of the story that was going to happen.
Yeah, I would say, you know, it's no secret that I don't have the attention span for long movies anymore. However, this one kept my attention the whole time, and I gotta say, I had bought the movie on Amazon before I finished the movie.
Oh, nice.
That's how much I enjoyed it.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was different than what I expected. I think I was expecting more horror, like really horror element to it. Just speaking from the sense of, like, I've heard so many people talk about this movie over the years, so much so that, like, I knew what happened in the film.
Okay.
And, you know, or for the most part, you know, knew what happened. And even then, like, it still had my attention, because I was actually seeing it for the first time, and, you know, just kind of seeing it all go down. And it's one of those movies as well that you don't know what to believe the whole time. You know, even in the ending, you know, you don't know what to believe. And so, like, I think that alone is one of the things that kind of kept me going. You know, kept the interest going for the movie, for the length of it. Because it was like, you know, if you have a really long film, but it's just A to B type, you know, they're trying to get from point A to point B, and you got it. Like, okay, so they're getting chased, or, you know, whatever the case is. Okay, but with this one, it was like, you don't know what's happening. You don't know who's crazy. You don't know who the bad guy is, or any of that. And yeah, so
who to trust.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, there are things that happened throughout it. Like, I felt like I was a detective watching it. So, like, you know, because I heard Mark Ruffalo call, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio multiple times, you know, boss and stuff. And I was like, that has to be something. You know, I just heard those things where you see a character and you're like, who is this? You know, just all that. And it was just, it just kind of kept me on my toes. You know, I didn't take any notes with this because I was just, like, I watched it, you know, non-stop. You know, I couldn't stop. So.
Yeah, and I think that you're on to something with, like, why it's so engaging is because it's very deliberate about, like, gaps in the story, misdirection, creating ambiguity, introducing things that make you question things that you thought you already understood. Mm-hmm. And, you know, even beyond just, like, kind of the normal twists and turns of what he's finding while he's there, you just never really feel like you have a strong grasp on what's really going on.
Yeah.
And one way that they kind of kept that going was by jumping back in time. And then sometimes it would be an actual flashback. And then other times it would turn into more like a dream. And then it also seemed like a couple of the scenes were just kind of weird on purpose. Like there's one of the dream sequences where it cuts to Leo's face and he's smoking a cigarette, but it's showing the smoke like going back into the cigarette instead of coming out. Like, just really random stuff through the whole thing, so that it's keeping you like confused on what's going on in the story level, but also visually, like, I'm confused by what's happening with what I'm seeing. And so its ability to engage on like multiple levels that way, I think, was a big part of, like, you didn't want to look away. Like, it did a really good job of holding your attention, which is a thing that I think we've both talked about is really hard to do, especially if I'm sitting at home in my living room and not in a theater.
Yeah, and I think that comes from, like, experience, like, director-producer combo thing, you know, so they knew, by this time they knew what they were getting themselves into, and they knew how to execute it. And I definitely appreciate first-timers, like, trying things out, like, if you just, you know, if you decide to put your mind to it and you do it, like, that's badass. Like, that's awesome. However, like, this goes to show, like, if you stick with it and the experience that comes with it, what could happen, and you could have a pretty damn good film. You know, I think it didn't have to have all the big names in it to make it good. You know, it could have had,
like, the $80 million budget and the A-list acting talent probably helped a lot too. You know?
Yeah, I think as far as, like, the atmosphere and the storyline and all that, it didn't have to have. I mean, I personally don't think that, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio or whoever made this film, that they could have been replaced with insert any actor here. I thought they did really good, but.
And we talked too a lot about how special effects don't have to be A+, they just have to not be bad enough to be distracting.
Yeah.
And I feel like with a story like this, again, like, the acting wouldn't have had to be like top tier. It just needed to not be bad enough to be distracting, which would have totally destroyed this movie.
Yeah, I think the only thing that was real confusing for me was, why didn't the Hulk show up in this film?
I thought you were going to say, how come Leonardo can act like so many different characters but cannot pull off a convincing role as a smoker?
He did bad at that, didn't he? At the very end, it pissed me off, man.
Yeah.
It pissed me off. Here's the thing that pissed me off is, like, I'm pretty sure he smoked. Like, he was a child actor, grew up, he was a wild child. I'm sure he smoked. And it's like, wait, did you decide to hold a cigarette like a wimp? You wimp?
It's like fully open hand, like
yeah, yeah,
so awkward.
Yeah, well, and you know
it
he
looked
can't.
like he's smelling his fingers every time he took a drag.
Oh man, I was so mad. And the thing is like he can't because like I'm pretty sure he smoked in like The Departed, and that was
sure
really good. And so man, I was pretty livid. But so one of the things I was reading about with this, because there's a lot of meaning throughout this whole thing, obviously, and one of the things that made sense to me after I watched it and when I read it was talking about the fire and water part of this. And this might not be a surprise to someone who's watched it multiple times. For me, it was of talking about how basically the fire is the not true thing that he's seeing, and the water is like the real, like realism, like what's really happening. So like the island is surrounded by water. So basically he's like in this truth dome. And then when you see the scenes that have the fire and like the explosions and stuff like that, that's all like in his head, and the fake or the thing that happened that he made up. Yeah. So he didn't have to deal with reality. And it was just like, I'm sure, seasoned film critics could have caught that. And I'm not one, but it was just like, when I was reading that, I was like, well, no shit, that's awesome. Like I did, because I'm also that old man too that thinks that way now. So it's like, well, no kidding, that's awesome. So I thought that was pretty cool representation of, now that you've watched it, now that I've watched it, and when I go back to watch it since I bought it, I'm looking forward to seeing those scenes again.
Yeah, for sure. That's really an interesting take that I hadn't put together, but yeah, the way that they wove in the flashbacks and when they wove them in, going back to it, kind of knowing like how it ends up. Yeah, that was a lot more interesting the second time around, because I think most of, or at least a lot of what he remembered about the war was probably accurate, but the way he was remembering his interactions with his wife were mostly not. Yeah. So that was like a really weird thing. So
yeah, it was interesting.
And I still, going back through it, I have all kinds of stuff in my notes where I'm like, I still don't have an answer to this at all. Mm-hmm. Like, I still don't know if the Rachel he found in the cave was real, the one that was claiming to have been a doctor there.
Oh yeah. Well, was there fire there? And there was fire in that scene, and so that's not
interesting.
That's
okay. Fair. Okay, I like this.
Yeah.
Another thing I thought that caught me coming back to it was the very opening scene when they're on the boat going out to the island, and he like comes out and he's been seasick on the inside of the boat, and then he's like introducing himself to Mark Ruffalo as if it's the first time they've seen each other. Yeah. But the boat is like far enough out you can't see any land, and there's not like anybody else on it. So it's not like they were just lost in the crowd. Right. Like, how did they get on the boat without seeing each other or having met before? But when you kind of know like what's coming, that makes a lot more sense. So it's almost like a little bit of foreshadowing. But otherwise, I feel like it mostly did not do a lot of giving you like a firm answer through most of it. And so I thought kind of the big twist at the end was pretty well executed.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Like the intro had me like questioning what was going on.
Yeah,
because it was one of those where I was like, wait, like what? Like, oh, so you're the other Marshall, like the guy who's dressed just like me and heading to the same place that the only place this ferry goes. Yeah. So I was like, okay, sweet. This is what we're in for. And then my opinion changed.
Yeah. Yeah. It was an interesting one. Like I said, we don't necessarily need to go through like point by point the way the story unfolded, but I thought it was definitely worth watching. I thought it was very intense. And, like I mentioned, the things that were kind of stood out in my mind thinking back on like what are some movies we should do this season. This was one that stuck out because we always complain about how most horror movies don't do that well. But what I had not remembered was just how intense the flashback scene at the end is, where he finally like comes to terms with what happened to his wife and kids.
Yeah.
And you like see that whole scene unfold. That was super dark, super gripping, and super uncomfortable. Like, this is a heavy movie, and it sticks in your mind after the fact.
Yeah. That one, the ending, man, whew, that was very intense.
Yeah. It's again one of those where you almost feel like you're watching something you shouldn't be seeing. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a private and intense and like painful moment that it's just like, I can't look away, but I also hate that I'm watching this happen. Yeah. Which is a thing, that we generally like when a horror movie pulls off well.
Well, yeah, and the thing too is like before they came up with the scene where his wife murdered his kids and he ended up murdering her. Like they kind of set it up in a way of like, you were an alcoholic, always away or something like that. She didn't want to, and you had to get that lake house or something, was just very straight up front with it. And it's like going into it, you knew that it was a flashback, but it was a different type of flashback, like one that you're fixing to get some real stuff happening. And then you're just like, mind blown kind of thing. It was gnarly.
Yeah, that whole sequence, and that sequence wasn't short either. Like, they definitely did not rush it, and I think that made it more effective. But that reminded me of one of those things where, like, because I really enjoy going to see movies at Alamo Drafthouse, and one of the things that comes along with that is that you have a whole room full of people eating and drinking. So a lot of times throughout the movie, you'll hear, like, silverware and popcorn bowls shuffling around and, the ice in people's drinks and stuff like that. And that's just kind of part of it. But every now and then you'll see a movie there where a sequence starts that has everybody so just like grabbed that it is dead silent in the theater. And like everybody's just on the edge of their seat, like not even moving, just completely enraptured by what's happening on the screen. And I would bet my next paycheck that last scene of this movie would have been like that.
Yeah. Yeah, without a doubt. Easily. Too intense.
Yeah. And then I think that made it even more kind of like your stomach drops, when the doctor, Mark Ruffalo, goes to talk to him afterwards, after he's like kind of come to terms with his reality and had his memories and understood everything. And then sits down and asks him how he's doing. And he's just like, well, got to get off this rock, Chuck. And is like talking to him like he's the other detective again. And then it ends with that shot to the lighthouse. Which I assume means that he's about to get lobotomized. Like he failed the last attempt. So they're just going to, take away his ability to process or think, like there's no rehabilitation at this point. And so that was also like a very sort of horror movie type ending, because you had the path for a happy ending despite all of the sad stuff, but then it didn't go that way.
Yeah. So I'm glad we got to the ending here, because I'm done with this podcast. See you later, asshole. Just kidding. So the thing with the ending, though, that in fact Katie actually pointed out after the film was he was, so the what he says, Andrew latest what last thing he says is, this place makes me wonder which would be worse, to live as a monster or to die as a good man, right? And then when he's walking away, because he does the whole acting like he's gonna get off the island kind of thing. He does the whole thing, and then Mark Ruffalo's character calls him Teddy. He says, "Where you going, Teddy?" Or whatever, and he doesn't look back. He doesn't answer, and he just keeps walking. And so the thought or the idea is, did he go there and get lobotomized so he didn't have to live with the memory of his wife and his kids dying? Which I think was the case, because he like kind of followed in line with what was happening. So he didn't want to live as a monster anymore. He wanted to die a good man without the memories, And and that's why he got lobotomized. If that's
Let me tell you something. That take just lobotomized me because it blew my mind. I think you might be onto something. That's brilliant.
Yeah, well, it was all Katie.
I love it.
That was all Katie, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, she started it, and then, I started reading more and more about it.
Yeah, it makes it even a darker ending.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, too, because it's like, I think it makes him almost like a hero, because he's not dealing, he is the most dangerous inmate, or whatever you want, patient that they've had. But
is he though?
Well, I mean, he did didn't he kick some ass for a minute, or at least yeah, I would say he probably
won
was.
A fight, but I don't.
I mean, he did
maybe
he did have training, I guess. If that's what you want to put it, but they said in the film that he was the most dangerous, but I mean, granted. He did blow up a car. If that was that had fire. I don't know if that was real or not. Who knows? But I like to think he got lobotomized so he didn't have to think about his kid.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. Joke's on him, because doing a lobotomy was only successful 20% of the time.
What happened to 80%?
He died. They died. Well, I mean, some of them gained weight. A big percentage of them gained weight. It just caused way worse problems. This was really big in the 40s and 50s, from my understanding, from my reading.
I must have got accidentally lobotomized at the start of the pandemic because my weight's just been up and up.
You damn right. Yeah.
You just have pregnancy sympathy.
Sympathy weight gain, yeah. Still got her going. She must be pregnant again.
Congrats, man.
No, thanks. Yeah, so overall, though, I was super happy with it. I'm not generally a huge fan of I like to know answers, and this one I felt did leave off on did he or didn't, but I made it up in my mind that he did.
Yeah,
and so I'm okay with that.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that the first time that I watched it, I was a lot more conflicted at the end about did they just gaslight him? Was he really there, as an investigator, and then they just set all this up and did that? And there was definitely a lot of there were a lot of things happening over the course of the movie to try and give you that impression. I think on subsequent watches, though, it's pretty obvious that you're meant to think that he really was Latus from the beginning. But anyway,
yeah, I think so for sure.
And honestly, I was a little nervous going into it because Prisoners I remembered so fondly, and then it was just kind of dragging for so long there at the end. I was like, oh man, is this going to be the same way? But I felt like this one lived up and was worth the time investment. So
yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right, man. I enjoyed this one. I'm glad we did it, and we will be back next week with Terror Firmer.
Terror Firmer. I hope it's good. I haven't seen it yet.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.